Each week, nearly a dozen movies are released theatrically. 40 films a month, more than 400 a year. That's a plethora of cinema. Too much cinema. You'd have to be an addict to see all that, but don't fret. We've got you covered. This is CinemAddicts.
Hey everyone, what's up? It's a new week of CinemAddicts. This is CinemAddicts episode 285. We are covering movies that are opening the week of Friday, March 14th, 2025. I'm Greg Srisavasdi. I am joined by my better Eric Holmes. Eric, how have you been?
Allegedly better than you.
Oh, allegedly? Well, you've been rad.
I have been extremely rad.
Are you radical or are you just rad?
I'm just rad. Radical. Come on.
What
do I look like?
Did you get to your residence, your domicile? Did you ride over? Were you on the BMX bike when you got to this podcast, Eric? What's going on right now?
Yeah. I get to. It was a last minute thing. You hit me up earlier today. I was like, hey, do you want to talk to two of the actors from Rad? I'm like, yeah, when? We're thinking like at noonish. I'm like, cool. Let's see that. And so I got to cram Rad in the movie Rad, and I got to
Is Rad good? I'm an idiot. I'm an 80s baby, not an 80s. I'm a 70s baby. I'm a Gen Xer like you. Yes, Eric, you're a Gen Xer. I still haven't seen Rad. Is Rad a good movie, Eric?
It is. Rad's pretty much like a 3-star banger type movie. I mean, it's got the 80s cheese, but it's got some great bike stunts. I mean, it's directed by Hal Needham, so you kind of know what you're getting. But the soundtrack's awesome. It's the story's kind of basic for that kind of thing. But
okay,
it's it's just basically a kid. They're having this big bike competition, and this one kid is pretty good at a bike and he wants to enter the competition, but then you got the evil guys trying to keep him out. They keep changing the rules, moving the goalposts on him. You can't get in unless you got a sponsor. We got a sponsor. Sponsor doesn't count unless they got this much money. They get that much money, he gets to enter the contest, and it's good stuff.
Rad doesn't need a spoiler alert, right? We know what's going to happen at the end of Rad, and that's fine, right?
Maybe you haven't seen it. What do you think happens at the end of Rad?
Everyone's happy that the main guy wins. I think that's how it's supposed to be, right? And there's
maybe
wrong.
Maybe not.
Okay.
Maybe you had to watch. But I just did an interview with Bart Connor and Bill Allen, and that interview was fun as hell.
Very good.
It only went on for 15 minutes. Felt like 15 seconds. Like as soon as the interview started, like once it was over, I was like, we just started and I gotta hop off this. But those guys were awesome to talk to. Wish I could talk to them longer, but you check out the interview and see for yourself.
Yes, we're gonna put the interview on our CinemAddicts audio feed pretty soon within the next several days. The reason why I'm gonna hold it for a couple of days is because I think the official Rad day, it's gonna be a Fandango. Wait, no, not Fandango. It's a Fathom Events one night only situation with Rad, I believe. Right, Eric? If I'm not mistaken, I think it's going to be.
Yeah, and they actually, I guess we probably put it up earlier because they mentioned what they're doing. I guess they do that. I don't know. Every year they do that often. Like they'll keep kind of reprising it and putting it out again and again. And it's just one of those movies that it's a cult classic. It's one of those movies that, for whatever reason, just kind of picked up and took off. And we actually talk a little bit about why that might or might not happen nowadays.
Well, how about this? I will put up Eric's Rad interviews with Bill Allen and Bart Connor this Friday on the CinemAddicts feed, along with his interview with Sven Temmel. He is an actor for a movie that we're reviewing this week. It's called High Rollers. So for this week, we are reviewing the movies Meanwhile, High Rollers, Endless Call for Fame, Leila and the Wolves, and Raging Midlife. Here's the good news. Bruce Purkey, unfortunately, this is bad news. He's still up in Eric Holmes's family attic, and he's actually, I don't know if is he thriving in the attic as we speak, Eric Holmes? Are you giving him good food?
I mean, if we're being honest, he doesn't make much noise, so I don't even know if he's still there. He might have snuck out, but
I was thinking the last couple of weeks, a big thing in CinemAddicts is the peppers, the fermented peppers, the steaks. You said you give Bruce Purkey now people food. Today is steak day at your local job of employ. Are you going to give him some steaks tonight because he's been such a good reviewer here on CinemAddicts over at the Cinem-Attic?
I mean, he's got to come by, and hopefully he does, because maybe steak night's just complicated ruse to pull him in when he sneaks out so I can chain him up again. But
Well, Eric,
he might be a little too crafty for that.
Eric, for this episode, you're not going to sneak out. We have about 55, 56 minutes left to go on this episode. But that said, once you leave, if it's steak night, does it mean a lot more work for Eric Holmes? Is it a big night?
It's actually easier because that's all people order. So I instead of having like a whole menu to deal with, I just got the one thing that everyone orders. So it's super easy.
So if you want to taste Eric's culinary menu, his food,
Huge.
his huge.
But you got to do this when you say it.
It steaks and try the fermented. How were those peppers? The fermented peppers.
I checked them. They're starting the fluid in it's starting to get milky, so we're getting close. Probably another couple weeks, and it should be ready.
Oh, very good. So if you want to try some of Eric's stuff and hang out and maybe talk movies and life, where can they go to see you in person, Eric Holmes, over at CinemAddicts?
You can go to Skybox Lounge.
Skybox
or
Lounge.
Anywhere that I'm running karaoke. Oh, that's another thing. So I work for Crazy Tony's Karaoke. Tony's been in town like all week, and I think he's going to be here for like a month. So I got to see the owner of the place that I work a couple times, and he's a pretty rad dude. So
you don't get nervous when he's a boss and you're doing karaoke.
No,
Are you okay with that?
No.
Okay.
The only people that get nervous are people that are doing stuff wrong.
Oh.
I do everything right, so I ain't nervous about it.
Well, there's a reason, folks, here over at CinemAddicts why I'm always nervous, because I'm doing a lot of wrong things. I'm glad Eric did the right thing by doing the rad interviews. I woke up around 1:30. I did a doom scroll on my iPhone and said, rad interviews. And I was just freaking out because I'd never seen rad, but I was thinking immediately that Eric Holmes would be the perfect interviewer for rad. So, Eric, thank you so much for taking over last minute for these interviews.
And again, wasn't nervous about it because I did nothing wrong during that interview.
You did nothing wrong. I'm always nervous because I do a lot of things wrong. I will also, Eric, I'm early forewarning regarding situation. If it's another night and it's 1:30 or 2 in the morning and I see a press day for Jim Cotta, you're all over it. I'm gonna make sure.
Yep.
Jim Cotta, a Michael Dudikoff movie, right?
Don't even ask.
Don't
just say Eric will do it. I'll let him know.
Phantasm, Iron Eagle, all over. You're all over that stuff, right?
Yep. Sam Furstenberg, I'm in. Scott Adkins, don't even ask. Just tell me when.
All right. Sounds good. Now, we're gonna get to rad this Friday, but as of this episode here, CinemAddicts episode 285, why don't we just start with before we start, I want to do Patreon. Eric Holmes, do you have a randomizer on you?
Do not. Between what and what?
Actually, why don't you pick, unfortunately, this month for our CinemAddicts Patreon, our contributor, Angie. It's going to be an Angie Clark month here over at Patreon. Thank you, Ryan Smith. We are having an assigned review for Patreon.
Oh.
This month, we have the year 2001 covering this month of March 2025. Ryan Smith, fellow Patreon member, Patreon patron. He picked Stacy, Attack of the Schoolgirl Zombies. Me, Bruce Purkey, and Eric Holmes will be reviewing that later in the month. For this Patreon, we have Angie Clark. She has 3 picks. Eric, without looking at the Google Doc, pick 2 numbers between 1 and 3.
Oh, 1 and 2.
1 and 2. So we are covering Amelie and Mulholland Drive. And Bruce Purkey will love Mulholland Drive. So Amelie.
3. Oh, there's 3.
Moulin Rouge.
All right.
Okay. So Eric was actually cheating. He was not looking at his Google Doc. So Amelie and Mulholland Drive paid for our Patreon members for March 2025. CinemAddicts listeners, $5 catch-all. You got a bonus episode with me, Bruce, and Eric talking Patreon. Specifically for this month, Amelie, Mulholland Drive. And again, if you're a Patreon member, we also get once a month, we do an assigned film from one of our patrons. This month it is Ryan Smith with Stacy, Attack of the Schoolgirl Zombies.
I'm looking forward to that one.
Right.
I have no idea what that's. I have a inkling of what that might be, but I think it'll be a pretty good one.
Hopefully,
we'll see how that turns out.
It is a good one. Speaking of good ones, our buddy Bruce Purkey over in the attic, in the Cinem-Attic, he will have reviews of the films. A film called Meanwhile. There's another movie called Endless Calls for Fame, which actually we'll review very quickly, but Bruce has a fuller review in the Cinem-Attic. And then Leila and the Wolves. Those are the reviews that Bruce will be having this episode. And he has also a review of the 1956, I believe it's James Mason film. James Mason's, if you guys don't know, very celebrated actor in his time. He starred in a movie called Bigger Than Life. Eric will also have a couple of recommends, and I'm not going to spoil it, but there's one of them, or maybe a couple of them, are pretty big movies. So we'll get to that in a second. But Eric Holmes, we were bearing the lead a little bit. I feel like it. And I don't know. I'm really happy that you enjoyed yourself in Rad. I hope you don't disappoint me because I was watching Raging Midlife, and this is a movie that I can say either Eric Holmes will really enjoy this movie, or Eric Holmes will say, this movie should be for me, but I'm not feeling it. So, Raging Midlife, it centers on a bunch of guys when they were kids. They loved watching 80s wrestling, they loved watching wrestling in the 80s. And one time, they're seeing in person Raging Abraham Lincoln. That was our wrestling idol. Raging Abraham Lincoln is basically an impersonation of Randy the Macho Man Savage. Okay, so but this one is Raging Abraham Lincoln. I forgot what happens in the match, but for some reason his
he throws Randy Savage or Raging Abraham Lincoln. Ooh, yeah, throws his shirt out, and they get it, and then it gets taken from him, and then a whole bunch of mess happens. The shirt ends up being lost.
And then these two kids are now adults. One of them is a lawyer. The other one is sort of a felon. His best friend, it's a lawyer and his best friend who does a lot of trouble. He's sort of a troublemaker. He's pretty much a troublemaker, but they're now adults, and it's their mission to find this missing Raging Abe shirt. Also actually making some really cool appearances, is Paula Abdul, who plays not the girlfriend,
Mary Todd.
She's Mary Todd, the fellow not wrestling partner, wrestling collaborator.
She's basically Queen Elizabeth to Randy Savage.
Right, exactly.
Randy Savage is a Raging Abraham Lincoln.
Right. So Raging Midlife is an homage to Miss Elizabeth or Queen Elizabeth. I think it's Miss Elizabeth.
And it was Miss Elizabeth, and then when he became Macho King, then she became Queen Elizabeth.
I stand corrected. Thank you, Eric Holmes. So this has to be a movie that is right up Eric Holmes' alley. I believe it's right up my alley as well. It's directed, co-written, and produced by Rob Taylor, and it's co-written and produced by Nick Costa. Both Rob Taylor and Nick Costa are in the movie. Chekhov, aka Walter Koenig, is in this movie as well, and the movie is voiced over by Eddie Griffin, who also makes an appearance in this movie. I'm not going to say should we say who Eddie Griffin plays? It's a pretty nice.
He's the narrator, El Duque.
Yeah, he's a narrator, and then he's El Duque, right? Okay, then we won't say what El Duque does, so we'll let that be a surprise. Eric, am I wrong? This has to be a movie for you, or not?
This movie is completely stupid, and I say that in the most positive of ways. It's kind of had some Let's Start a Cult vibes to it, where it's like Let's Start a Cult is like really stupid, but it's funny, and this one is also stupid and also funny. Yeah, and plus there's it has like a bunch of like for instance, we mentioned the Randy Savage and the WWF stuff that they did, where it's Randy Savage, it's the WWF, but it's not technically
right.
Similar to how A Violent Nature is basically a Friday the 13th movie, but it's not really a Friday the 13th. It's kind of one of those that like they have a bit where Arsenio Hall show plays in the movie, but it's not the Arsenio Hall show. It's something else. Like they have a bunch of stuff like that. And you basically just have a couple numbnuts trying to find a shirt, and then they just go through a bunch of strange ways of trying to get it, and hilarity ensues. Yeah, this movie is not like highbrow by any stretch of the imagination, but I like comedies that don't take themselves too seriously. I like comedies that can you know what? We're just going to be a stupid comedy and we're fine with that. And I'm always on board for stuff like that.
And Eric, the movie, it's an indie film. And of course, here at CinemAddicts, that's what we like to spotlight, indie-driven projects. But it's really well shot for whatever budget they had. Camera's always moving. Some of the visual compositions are pretty, for its budget, eye-catching. It's a really well done indie comedy about a bunch of, like Eric Holmes says, a bunch of numbnuts doing really dumb things for about 95, 96 minutes.
And when you start a movie off lighting a little girl's hair on fire, you know you're in good hands.
Right. I'm trying to. It's one of those things where I think there is one caveat. Our buddy Bruce, I think he tried watching this movie several times. I don't know if he's going to mention it in the cinematic. I don't think he finished it. So maybe it wasn't his wavelength. Also, the comedy might not appeal to some, right, Eric? They might get frustrated with it. I mean, if you're not on that lane, that's what I'm saying, Eric.
But this is definitely a movie. Put it on, and you'll know within like 5-10 minutes if this is a movie for you or not. Because it's not like, it doesn't like button hook you or anything. You just like once you start, you know almost immediately what kind of movie this is. And so if you're not on the movie's comedic wavelength, just bail. There's nothing wrong with that. But then if you're watching the first 5-10 minutes and you're like, this is pretty stupid and hilarious and I dig this, stick with it because it just continues that.
There's also a woman named the actress Emily Sweet, I believe that's her name. She's very good in this movie. I mentioned previously Nick Costa and Rob Taylor, but Emily Sweet, she plays the obnoxious sister of one of the kids, and she has an important part to play in this missing, what is it, Raging Abraham Lincoln T-shirt, and she's funny in this movie as
Rage
well.
Mania.
Rage Mania shirt. Thank you, Aaron.
Which is weird because so the Abraham Lincoln is basically Randy Savage, but he also has a championship belt, and the Rage Mania is definitely a nod to Hulkamania. So it's kind of Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan kind of mashed into one character.
Right.
I could be wrong. I don't think Randy Savage ever won the championship belt, but
Oh, very good. Okay, so
maybe I'm wrong about that.
who knows? Again, me and Eric were trying to reflect on our lives back in the 80s. I just know just from this conversation that Eric watched his share of WWF. I watched my share of no, and it's not WWE. Back in the 80s, it was WWF.
Yeah, World Wildlife Foundation.
So my guys were, of course, Sergeant Slaughter.
I still, to this day, I still can't get used to WWE. It just seems
Same.
weird to me.
I know, it seems weird to me as well. So this Raging Midlife I think its main audience will be people like me and Eric who are in their raging midlife years. But I think this comedy has legs for people of all ages who, like Eric said, are really digging the silliness of this comedy. And it's really well executed. Even though some people may not like it, I really dug it. Raging Midlife in theaters and on demand March 14th. 4.5 stars. I'm sorry, Eric. 4.5 stars. I'm going to see it again. If it's on DVD and I had money, I will check it out.
Yeah, I'm 3-star banger on this. It definitely depends on your comedic taste. But like I said, you get 5-10 minutes into it, and this seems like your cup of tea. You're going to dig it. And of course, there's going to be people that hate it, and that's fair too. But I think if you're on this movie's comedic wavelength, you're going to get a lot more out of it than most.
Yeah, well, 3-star banger from Eric Holmes and 4.5 stars from me, Raging Midlife in theaters and on demand March 14th. Now let's get to a movie it's actually a documentary called Endless Calls for Fame. Here is the official plot synopsis. Quote, Endless Calls for Fame takes place in the gritty streets of NYC in the 1990s during a time when punk and indie rock were moving from the underground into the mainstream. Okay. And director Olivia Serafini Sali, she spotlights this band called the New Rising Sons. New Rising Sons. Sons is spelled S-O-N-S. There's 3 guys. One's a guitarist. The other one's a vocalist. The other one's a drummer. And it's about their lives who, once they get signed by a big label, there's a reason why their music, even though their music was good when they were recording it, they ended up not surviving past a certain date and they ended up breaking up. And this documentary looks at what happened to this band who was so promising way back in the late 90s where they signed that album deal, but due to maybe egos or just creative differences, they went their separate ways. What's interesting is Olivia Serafini Sali, the filmmaker, a lot of this documentary comes from her personal archival footage, as well as recently found footage of their recording of their album. I listened to the music after watching Endless Calls for Fame, which is a good sign for the documentary. And it's a really interesting look at these 3 band members. They are Garrett Klan, Drew Thomas, and Kevin McGinnis. Kevin McGinnis is guitarist, drummer is Drew Thomas, and the vocalist is Garrett Klan. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I had a good time watching Endless Calls for Fame. I interviewed Olivia and I asked her, about, since she's a friend and a colleague of all three of them, maybe, who knows, was she being nice to them or was she handling them with kid gloves? I didn't say kid gloves in the interview, but I was asking, well, if they're your friends, is there, I mean, she could have gotten like really a current affair tabloid-y approach to this documentary, but I think it really wasn't needed because there are still some questions left to be answered regarding Endless Calls for Fame. Will you realize why they actually broke up? Yes. But what's interesting is you get to see it's written all over their faces about their disappointment over what happened some years ago. And, it, in one instant, when they could have been so successful and make a lot of money, who knows if they actually got along, their careers would be so different. But again, it's a very value added documentary. It's great to watch. It's available on digital and cable VOD March 14th. That is Endless Calls for Fame. The new Rising Suns, even though they are now disbanded, their music is available on Spotify and whatever digital platform you use. It's a very interesting look at this band from the late 1990s. Endless Calls for Fame. My rating is 4 stars. 4 stars for that doc. Next up is Eric Holmes, High Rollers. What can you tell our listeners about this movie? Is it like Ocean's 11? What is it? An action thriller? What is High Rollers about?
Yes, it is. I didn't know this was a sequel, but I like this. Yeah, it's got definitely has that Ocean's 11 kind of vibe to it. It's basically a heist movie.
Casino heist, right? It's not
yeah.
really, the plot's not really that important, right? John Travolta's girlfriend is kidnapped.
The plot does get a little overly complicated, but not so much that you can't follow it. But yeah, you're basically just watching them set up the gambit and see how it plays out. And then I guess the only thing I really didn't like about this was the ending, because the ending was a little too
perfect, meaning too.
Yeah. It's like, oh, and this good thing happens, and look, like everything's coming together perfectly. I'm like,
right, like the perfect puzzle.
Stop it. But everything leading up to the ending was really fun, really good. I mean, John Travolta's always great.
I think the main attraction for High Rollers, I don't know if you agree with this, is just seeing the actors work. Gina Gershon and Quavo and all of these, and Swen Temmel. Those that's the most interesting stuff.
Yeah. I'm not sure what else I can say about it. It's just you get and the weird thing is, I thought John Travolta was going to be the bad guy in this, and and this is not like a twist where he's the good guy. Like, he's basically the good guy throughout. But just you look at the poster and you look at all the marketing for it, it looks like he's supposed to be like the bad guy, but no, he's a main character and he's good. And
can we say Gina Gershon as his girlfriend, and she was a former she was a former federal agent, I believe, because I think in Cash Out,
something like that.
The first movie in Cash Out, Gina Gershon wasn't in it. The actual person playing that character was Kristen Davis from Sex and the City. If I could be wrong, but Kristen Davis is in the first movie, Cash Out, and then I think Gina Gershon resumes the role of that person. The person's name is Decker, and Decker, played by Gina Gershon, she's good in the movie. It's great to see Gina Gershon in movies, in anything. What, Bound, Killer Joe, Family Show. Don't worry, I got you.
You said the magic word, Killer Joe.
Killer Joe. Rest in peace, William Friedkin. Yeah, she's quite memorable in that movie. She does, by the way, highly underrated performance by Gina Gershon. She's the best part of Killer Joe, and there's a lot of great parts.
Yeah,
but she's just amazing.
But High Rollers, it's not like kind of like the world on fire or anything, but this would be kind of similar, I guess, kind of similar to Raging Midlife, in that like you'd have this on in the background and kind of half pay attention to it, or just kind of but with Raging Midlife, like, I would be excited to watch that again. This one, if it's on, I'd be like, oh, cool, High Rollers, I'll watch this. But if it's, I don't know that I would put this on again by myself.
Right.
Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense. It's one of these things. High Rollers, even though it's a casino heist, is it a really tense movie? The answer is no. Is it a top tier action film where you're just really invested in the action sequences? No. Sometimes, but ultimately, I think, again, it's just watching the ensemble do their work within this pretty much indie-driven action thriller slash comedy. So High Rollers for me in theaters, digital, and on demand Friday, March 14th. I'm giving it 3 stars. What about you, Eric Holmes?
I'm right there too. Yeah, definitely not a 3-star banger, but it's definitely a 3-star movie. It was fun, pass the time, and again, if I walked in and someone was watching it, I'd be like, "Oh, cool, High Rollers, let's watch this."
And Swen Temmel, who Eric interviews, and
Yeah,
you'll see it later in the week with along with his interviews with Rad's Bill Allen and Bart Connor. He's a good guy and he's a good actor as well. So yeah, check out that interview in a couple of days from Eric Holmes over at CinemAddicts. Speaking of Eric Holmes, before we get out of here, you have a couple of recommendations, possibly?
I do. These are so normally we do movies that aren't out yet, but these movies are out. I watched this one last week, and I didn't think to even cover it on the show last week, but I probably should have. But it was Saturday Night, a Jason Reitman movie
Sure.
about the first night of Saturday Night Live. I guess it's called Saturday Night because they weren't sure if it was going to be live or not because they were supposed to like record the rehearsals and things go sideways. This felt a lot like an Aaron Sorkin movie. So right away, you know what I feel about this. Loved it. But yeah, all the performances, you got, let's see, Corey Michael Smith playing Chevy Chase. He was just nailed Chevy Chase, like his mannerisms, his voice, like everything. Then you got someone like Gabriel LaBelle who played Lauren Michaels. Didn't look or sound anything like Lauren Michaels, but his still captured kind of the spirit of what possibly went on during that time. So, and you know, all the other actors kind of do somewhere in between. I think Lauren Michaels and Chevy Chase are like the ends, the two extremes. Like one's like dead on, one's not at all, but captures certain things, and then everyone's somewhere in the middle. So it's kind of fun watching certain actors come in and play other iconic actors and comedians that throughout history, I guess. But yeah, you're basically just watching Saturday Night gonna go on or not. It's gonna be canceled. Is Willem Dafoe's character gonna pull the plug or not? And it's weird because it's like watching the Titanic. You know how it ends, but you're still on the edge of your seat going, "Oh no, is this gonna work out? Oh, of course it's gonna work out." Is Lauren Michaels going to talk John Belushi to come back and do the show? I don't know. Oh wait, yeah, he does. Is George Carlin going to get piss and walk? Oh wait, no, he doesn't. It's like this is all stuff we know, but for some reason, watching it play out still had me, wondering how it was going to turn out, which is stupid. But movies can do that to you. It makes you forget how history works.
It's probably one of Jason Reitman's better films, Eric, you would say?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I like Jason Reitman in general. Like, I love Thank You for Smoking when it came out. Juno's pretty good. Let's see, what I'm trying to think of what else he did.
Those are all good movies. I haven't seen the Ghostbuster one that he did a couple of years ago. Haven't seen that one.
Oh yeah, yeah, I didn't see that either.
Yeah,
Up in There is good. Young Adult. Oh, I liked Labor Day. I know a lot of people hated that one.
Yeah, Labor Day is not a bad movie.
I couldn't tell you anything about it. I just remember watching it, going, "Oh yeah, that was cool." But yeah, I didn't watch the Ghostbusters, so shame on me for that, I guess. But yeah, Saturday Night. Yeah, now that I'm looking at it, I think that might be my favorite movie of his so far. And then Thank You for Smoking, and then everything else under that. But yeah, this was a good one. And again, it felt like an Aaron Sorkin movie. And this one I would watch again on purpose. I would watch this a couple times on purpose. I'll probably go 5 stars on this. I like this one quite a bit.
5 stars on Saturday Night. Where did you see it, Eric? Did you pay for it on YouTube? Is it on streaming or something?
Was it on Hulu?
Okay,
I can't remember. It was one of the streaming services. I was over at my friend Zoe's house, and we were trying to find something to watch, and we had already watched Let's Start a Cult, and then we're like, well, what else to watch? Oh, let's watch Saturday Night.
Wait, so your friend's house, does your friend really enjoy Let's Start a Cult?
Yeah, he calls me Celery Bones now.
Celery Bones. I love it.
All right, and in fact, a bunch of people call me Celery Bones. So, like, for those of you who don't know, there's a part in Let's Start a Cult where they meet the first person that they're going to recruit, and he's like walking out of an army recruitment office, and he's wearing like the old school fatigues, and they're like, So you're like, in the military now? He's like, nah, nah, they wouldn't let me in. Said I got like celery bones or something. And so we saw that and we were like laughing our butts off about it. And then ever since then, like Zoe keeps calling me celery bones. And now a bunch of people call me celery bones. And
That's not
so,
that. That's good.
yeah.
That's
So
great.
thank you. Let's try to call. Love your movie, and it gave me one of the worst nicknames on the planet.
Celery Bones, Eric. Eric Celery Bones Holmes. I really love it. In love, let's start a cult. Glad you like Saturday night. Finally, Eric Holmes, you have a, I don't know if it's a recommendation or not. Here's the thing. Mickey 17, currently Rotten Tomatoes, critics give it 77%. Audience members for the
Seems low.
popcorn meter give it 72%. And then I've been reading that this movie is very polarizing. Why is it polarizing, Eric Holmes, and what is your review on Mickey
I
17?
mean, the movie's definitely like highly politically charged. But the it was written and directed by Bong Joon-ho, who makes nothing but awesome movies. You know, Memories of Murder, Oakjaw, Parasite. Won best international film and best picture at the Oscars.
Did he do the host? I think he did the host as well,
Yep,
right?
he did The Host. He did Mother.
Mother. Oh my
Sleeping
God.
Dogs Lie. I'm forgetting a couple of them, but
Okay.
either way, all his movies are fantastic, and this one's no different. This one's based off a book Mickey 7 by Edward Ashton. I think Bong Joon-ho said he changed it to Mickey 17 because he wanted to kill 10 more of the Mickeys. But basically, Robert Pattinson starts off the movie. He's Mickey 17. He's basically a clone. They call him like expendable or expendables. Basically, what it is they have a human, someone developed a technology that can print humans. So they'll store your memory in this brick, and then when the body dies, they incinerate the body, and it incinerates it to where it basically you can pull the individual uh, particles or atoms from it. Just kind of take what you need, oxygen atoms or carbon atoms or whatever you want, and then you can reform a human. And so this is illegal on Earth, but it's legal in space. So they'll have these expendables, like they'll go off and do like missions on different planets. Well, this is too Greg, for instance, if you're expendable, this is too dangerous for a human to do. But Greg, you can do it because if you die, we have your memory, and we'll just reprint your body and put your memories into that.
Right.
So you like your body dies, but you still live on. That's kind of the conceit of it. And so it opens up with Mickey 17 dying, and then it gives you kind of a flashback to catch you up to that point, and then you get to learn the world a bit, and then you find out that Mickey 17 didn't die, but the people didn't know that, so they printed out Mickey 18. And
Mm,
then so now when Mickey 17 and Mickey 18, well, first of all, you can't do this. You can't have two clones occupying the world at the same time. That's a big no-no. They didn't know they were doing that. So, but then once you get the two clones kind of see before Mickey 17 had this in his head that, oh, if I die, it sucks, it hurts, but I'll live on. Now that he's seeing 18, well, if I die, I'm just dead because
mm,
you're me and I'm looking at you. So I'm not you. So it kind of,
right.
it
Right.
kind of throws off the whole, trajectory of his life after he dies, throws it kind of in the trash. And then, so they play with that. And of course, it's Bong Joon-ho. And so the story's going to go in a bunch of different directions. I think where it's polarizing is Mark Ruffalo's character, Kenneth Marshall. He's basically playing Trump in this. So the book came out in 2022. The movie came out now, but I mean, they didn't shoot it yesterday. They shot it over a certain period of time. And there's like even a part where like Mark Ruffalo's character like gets grazed by a bullet, you know. And so they're like, and he doesn't he doesn't do a Trump impression, but there's certain mannerisms that kind of make you feel like that's kind of what he's playing. So I'm guessing in the polarization kind of probably comes from that. But
Mm.
I mean, his character is a great villain in this. Sort of, there's stuff that happens later on in the movie that I won't get into, but kind of his character. basically makes all the a-hole decisions. Like what's I mean, for one, he wants to start a white master race. So like right away, you know that he's a great guy. And he's gonna make the world, he's gonna make the universe great again. But yeah, so it can be polarizing, but you know what? If you don't like it, then I don't know what to tell you.
Were you not disappointed?
Not being racist.
So you weren't disappointed. You were not disappointed, and you were.
No, this movie's got a bunch of things on its mind, and it's a little over 2 hours long, and it takes the time to like really get into and say things about all the stuff that it's kind of touching on. And it's not just about like Trump bad. It's not just about clones. Like, you've seen a Bong Joon-ho movie. You know how they kind of like go off in all sorts of different directions. Like you think you're watching this movie, and by the end of the movie, you realize you just watched like 13 different stories, and they all played out and paid off handsomely. And this one's no different.
Okay, so that is Mickey 17 currently in theaters. Eric Holmes, what is your rating on Mickey 17?
This one is a 6.9 star movie.
Okay.
Again, like the people that are, the Trump stans, stop being a snowflake. Just watch the movie.
Oh, there you go.
Get over yourselves.
Talk about it. Pull quote from Eric Holmes over at CinemAddicts. So that's Mickey 17. That's 6.9 stars from Eric Holmes. We are done for our section of CinemAddicts. Bruce Purkey will be up momentarily with the Cinem-Attic. Eric Holmes, you have any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Yeah, steak night tonight at the Skybox Lounge. Come on down.
Come on down. See Eric Holmes.
And in fact, here's mea culpa, I guess. Go to Skybox Lounge. It's not me, but the owner, huge Trump guy. So you'll see a bunch of anti-Democrat stickers.
But the food's good, right? Food's good.
The food's good because I'm cooking it. But if you want to lick your wounds after watching Mickey 17 and watch eat steak while looking at a sticker that says "Buck Fighting" on it, you can come down and do that.
All right, so that is Skybox Lounge, right? Skybox Lounge.
Yes.
Okay, and Eric Holmes is over at the. I'm not gonna say grill. What is it? Where are you over at the kitchen?
Yeah. We got a flat top. It's not a grill.
Okay,
I'm still able to cook steaks on it.
Oh,
pretty good. I found a way to baste it without basting it. So
some nice secrets. I wonder if any of our CinemAddicts Facebook group members, you gotta come out and visit Eric. William Lindis has visited you before, right? We we met up. He was
working up in Denver, and I went up to see him. But so we got the steaks, obviously. We got the garlic mashed potatoes. We also got corn on the cob. Apparently this is a thing. I didn't know this. I just did this as a goof, and it turned out it worked great. Deep frying corn on the cob.
Ooh, okay.
So I've seen it online where they put it in like a batter and deep fry it. Don't need to do that. Just deep fry the corn on the cob. Leave it down for a couple minutes so like the corn gets brown. And that's the cool thing is when you're deep frying it, it'll burn eventually, but it takes a lot to burn it. So like you just get the corn all brown. You pull it up, drizzle some butter on it, and sprinkle some Lowry's seasoning salt. Fantastic. Because we're trying to figure out how we're gonna do the corn. It was like, hey, we could boil it, but like anytime you boil food, unless it's like, this is for Food-O-Matics.
Food-O-Matics.
I save it for that, but yeah, deep fried corn on the cob. Do that.
Did you get any reviews from?
Just drop it in there, butter, salt, and you're good to go.
Any reviews on the deep fried corn?
That's why we're doing it. I tried it once just as a lark, and turned out people were like, holy crap. I'm like, yeah, right.
Okay,
that's just the way we're doing it now.
That's awesome. All right, that is Eric Holmes, Food-O-Matics over at Cinem-Attic, and of course. Before we go, I was going to say, Claire, I need to review. I need to record Claire again because I lost that audio drop. So no Claire this week. But again, here's Bruce Purkey.
Welcome to the Cinematic, the Cinem-Attic, the attic where I watch cinema or movies or flicks or whatever you want to call them. People like to use different terms to try to act hoity-toity. We're watching movies. I'm watching movies. Greg's watching movies. Eric's watching movies. We just all watch too many movies. Or just the right amount of movies. I don't know. Whatever you consider. Well, what do we have this week? Well, the first thing is, the most disappointing thing is, we had a screener for a movie called The Actor from Neon, which looked really interesting, and they revoked the screener. They took it away. I don't know if we're just not good enough for it, or if they don't have the confidence in the movie, or they had so much confidence in the movie that they don't want it to go to screeners. They want it to go right to the theaters. I don't know, but we didn't get The Actor. So, what do I have this week? I have 3 screeners. I actually watched almost a 4th one, but I can't review it because I didn't finish it, and I don't want to disservice a movie by giving it a review for a partial watch. So I cannot review this week Raging Midlife, but I'm guessing that Eric or one of the 2 out there did watch it. I don't think Greg did. I think Eric did. And I'm guessing it'll get a decent review. It's sitcom-y. Anyway, not going to review it because I didn't watch the whole thing. I will give it one. Let's say one thing about it. I'll give it credit. It did have a needle drop of a song by Lambrini Girls, and that automatically gets an extra point or star in my book just by including Lambrini Girls in the soundtrack. Now, if you don't know who Lambrini Girls is, go look them up. Now, I do have 3 screeners I did watch, and I have 1 recommend from 1956. The movies I've got this week are, let's see if I've got them all in my list here for you guys. I've got Meanwhile. I actually thought I've done a documentary-ish movies this week. So I've got Meanwhile, which is kind of a documentary. I've got Leila and the Wolves. And then I've got, I can't even write my own writing here, Endless Calls for Fame. And then the recommend is Bigger Than Life from 1956. Okay, let's get to this. Meanwhile, directed by Catherine Gund and actually a bunch of other people, but I just listed the first one on the IMDb. So maybe Greg will give you a full listing of everybody who's in this movie. But Catherine Gund is the first one that shows up. Includes people like Ivy Young, Nate Lewis, Daniel Alexander Jones, Josh Quint, Julie Vanderhoop. And what do you describe this movie as? This is a really tough one. Meanwhile, and I didn't actually look at the IMDb description, but I bet you it's something like an art installation meets social activism meets documentary, some version of that. What you got basically here is not it's a documentary of sorts. They're real people that are living in the world, living their real lives. Most of them are artists or poets. Almost all of them have something to do around the Black experience in America, activism in America, expressing the life of a Black person trying to be especially artistic and creative in America. And in that way, you have kind of historical and more current people represented here. So, for example, Ivy Young, she is older. I think she's a poet by trade, a poet writer. And you see her when they're filming this. I think she's died by the time this is actually coming out. You see that this in the movie, she is, like, I don't know if she has emphysema or what her actual illness is, but she has a breathing tube in, and she's talking about various experiences, looking through photos of herself in the 70s and the 60s, recounting experiences, but all at the same time, you're also seeing art. As you can tell, this is kind of loosey-goosey the way this whole thing is presented. And they'll kind of hop around to different people that way. They'll kind of hop back and forth between different people. Toni Morrison's works get, spoken in the background or spoken by a person, and then you hear Toni Morrison actually speaking it. And essentially, and it feels like a lot of this was shot during the pandemic too. A lot of people feel like they're kind of isolated or feeling less connection, which is a big thing when you're an artist, any sort of an artist. And when I kind of use the broad term, musician, like I said, musician, poet, painter, whatever it might be, to be isolated like they were during the pandemic is tough because sure, you have time possibly to create your art, but you don't have a way to really share it very well, which is why so many people ended up having podcasts and whatnot, Zoom things, because they wanted to get their connection out there in some way. So in that way, this movie is kind of presenting that, but it's really, like I said, really through the lens of a black person in America. And you think about how turbulent, well, the times are in general, how they are now, but it was very turbulent then. If we all remember 2019 to 2020, that election year, the real George Floyd, you've got a whole bunch of Black Lives Matter stuff. You've got a real upheaval in American social, racial politics, which honestly hasn't really gone down much since then and is on its way back up even higher again. But during that period, it was very, very striking, I think. So this movie is just a lot of that. And it will work or not work to you based on kind of your interest and your connection to just art in general and kind of watching people create art and hearing them talk about their art. Or it's not a bunch of like actual performances. It's much more people in their workspaces. Kind of like similarly, I watched David Lynch, A Life in Art recently. I might have the title slightly wrong there, but a lot of that was him in his art studio next to his house, just creating art while he told stories of his life. This has a similar effect, this movie, but instead of one person, you've got, I don't know, maybe 10 different people that you kind of bounce around to. So for me, it worked. It was pretty good. I kind of would like a little more focus or a little more like yeah, I say focus. Something that was specifically kind of a through line, I think would have made it a little more engaging. But overall, I was engaged by it because I like art and artists, and watching them create stuff is always kind of interesting and somewhat inspiring. And of course, the cause or the general thing that they were discussing is very pertinent as well. I say for me, it's 3.5. This isn't a run out and see it kind of a movie unless you are really engaged with the art community. Then, or some of the artists, you might be really struck to do it. I did really appreciate the way there was the representation of the generations, because, like I said, you have some people like Ivy Young, and I remember there's another one that was in here, and I forget her name, but some artists and activists that have been around for many years and are like really, elderly, and it really seeing elderly people along with really young people, kind of seeing the intelligence and vibrance of somebody who's, in their 80s or above, and kind of remembering how much they have to offer still is is always good, I think, and that's a real plus here. Maybe as somebody who's getting later in their life and getting grayer every day, I appreciate that. So I would, like I said, 3.5 stars for this. Definitely if it's on a streamer or something like that, you might give it a try, drop it in, and you might find some real value here, kind of just depending on where you fall in that spectrum, as I mentioned. Okay, next up, Leila and the Wolves. Now, this is definitely an unusual movie. Leila and the Wolves, directed by Heini Srour. Boy, it's hard to pronounce. Srour, Srour. I don't know how to say that name. Very rough. Leila is the only one the actor. That's Nabila Zaitouni. This is from 1984. Now, this is a reissue. I think it's been, like refreshed and gone through and just cleaned up all the images and put it all together and made it sure it's really, really the best version you can get nowadays. I feel like this movie is a very lost movie, and I do not know the history of this movie, and that's one thing I kind of would have liked a little more of at either the beginning or the end. One of those things, like they did this for Caligula last year when they had the recut of it. Something at the beginning would have been nice for, so like this movie was made and blah, 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 and had been only shown here, and we have now refreshed it, and here it is for all of its glory for everyone to see, that kind of a thing. I would have appreciated something like that, but we didn't get that here. So I am guessing any of you out there can probably go out there and do some research and find a lot more out about this movie. But the reason I think it was pretty much lost is you can look this up and you find a little bit of information. But usually after I watch a movie, I kind of have my feelings and my impressions and kind of where I'm falling. And I'm always curious, like, well, what do other people think? Am I off base? I love this movie. Did other people love it, or did everyone hate it? And so I kind of usually go out and check out a couple of reviews just to see, like, am I an outlier or am I kind of with the flow? Just for curiosity's sake. Especially when I'm different than everyone else. And I'm like, wow, that's curious. I really loved it. And everyone else hated it. Interesting. But this movie, I literally don't think I could find one review And that's really unusual. I mean, it did have ratings on IMDb, but when you went to Rotten Tomatoes, I don't think it even had a rating, and I don't think it had one review that I could find. And I would just do a basic internet search. I don't think I found a review of it either. Maybe a couple brief descriptions. So my guess is, based on the movie itself, it probably never got much of a release, and partly because of its obscurity, international film from the Palestinian, not the Palestinian, really, it's the Lebanese, Lebanese slash Palestinian point of view. And that alone from 1984 probably made it relatively obscure and not very, I guess, commercial. Never would be commercial, I don't think. But I think that now, just with all that's been going on, specifically in Gaza and everything, and kind of the resurgence of that issue, even though this is a kind of a side version of that issue, it's still the same issue to a lot of degrees. The resurgence of that, I think, caused this to kind of get put out into the light of day again. So, Leila and the Wolves, it's in Lebanon, like I said, 1984, mostly in Lebanon. And the quote about the wolves, I think there's a quote in here. I wrote it down. Hopefully I got it right. But there's some quote, and I think it's supposed to be, it's probably from storytelling in the area, kind of culture in the areas, is that you blame the absent shepherd, not the wolf, for the, obviously for the attack. So the idea is that, well, the wolf is going to be the wolf. The wolf is going to attack you. There's always going to be something aggressive towards you. And you blame the people who could protect the, the vulnerable more than the wolf itself. Because if the people that are supposed to protect the wolf just are absent, as in the quote, they just literally abdicate their duty. It's not like they don't try and they fail. They just abdicate their duty. They don't protect at all. They just walk away. Then they are to blame for the violence and stuff that occurs. That's the idea, I think. And I think that might be the underpinning of all of this. Now, what makes this interesting? So it's kind of I want to say, it's not an anthology per se, but it kind of acts like an anthology. And the way this works is it basically is giving events historically of the Lebanese kind of resistance against the Jewish state, Israel state, I should say, against them, especially in the West Bank area, because I think that area involves a lot of what's going on in this movie. A lot of the events that are kind of depicted here, especially that. Throughout history, from the early part of the 1900s up till like the 70s, I think, because if you think about it, this movie is made in the 80s. So I think the events that are depicted probably go to about the 70s. But they're little, like, they'll be like little events in time. And the kind of the framing piece of this is you have Leila, and she's kind of dressed in white. And there's like a semicircle of women in the, now I might be using the wrong terminology, burqa is what you always hear. But the dark robes that cover everything except the eyes. I believe that's a burqa, but I could be, if I'm wrong, sorry guys. And they're in like a semicircle watching Leila near the ocean. And then it'll like circle around them and it will eventually show you kind of a vignette or a scene from a different time period. And it's starting back in the early, like 1920s or something. And then kind of each time it'll jump up in time a little bit, kind of chronologically. And the other kind of tying piece is you have Leila kind of in current day in London, and there's a photo exhibition of the kind of Palestinian slash Lebanese resistance and battles that they've had and various like things that have happened in wars. And there's just this kind of photo exhibition she's showing, and some of those I think represent some of the time periods that we end up seeing in the movie. The other key piece to this is it's all about the women's role in the resistance. And that is kind of the key difference in this movie. That is the special sauce. That is the thing that makes this really unique. And that is, in every one of these historical events, you're seeing how the women were a key part of kind of helping these various resistance efforts, and also involved in some of the atrocities too were done against them. Because of course, whoever is the occupying force, whether it would be the British or the Israelis or whoever it was at various time periods, depending on the occupying force, if they start to believe that anybody is a threat to them, and we've seen this with America, occupations of places too. When you see that any member of that population that you're occupying could be the threat, then you're more apt to kill the women and the children along with the men because you're afraid of everybody and you think everybody could be a quote terrorist or whatever it might be. So you see versions of that here where it shows that they really are part of the resistance and they are doing things. So, for example, you see an extended sequence in here of a wedding, which is really striking, where I think this is when the British were kind of occupying much of the area. And to get by them and to smuggle things through, they perform a wedding. And the occupiers are allowing a wedding because a wedding seems like that's a good thing and that's not a threat. But meanwhile, the resistance, the women especially, are doing things like hiding bullets in the food, and the guns are hidden in cloths and things that they're bringing to the wedding, and the whole wedding march is happening, and all of this is to get weapons to a certain area. So you see that kind of thing. There's another sequence where I think for a good chunk of it, the beginning part, it is British, but they are running and chasing and chasing the men down the streets, these really narrow streets with the two-story buildings on either side of the like really narrow, like kind of almost alleyways. And the women are all running to the edges and throwing like pots and like rocks if they have them, and some of them are boiling water and throwing it over the edge onto the Brits and stuff. So a lot of interesting stuff here about like the role of women in war, and even also somewhat the role of women within their own society. So you do see the sexism in their own society as well being represented. It's just a really interesting and unusual movie that I like when you have an international movie, especially a historical one, that it is very much unique because it is fully enmeshed and representing the culture it comes from. So even though it's not necessarily as easy for me to understand all of the allusions or all of the cultural like colors to it, because there might be a bunch of stuff that's based on maybe tales or stories from that culture that I don't know that would enrich it even more. The fact that it is so uniquely from that point of view, I think is really valuable and interesting to me. It makes it more interesting to me than just like, you know, John Smith telling this story, which sure could be interesting in its own right, but it doesn't have that, I don't know, that genuine feel for to me. Anyway, a pretty cool movie, pretty interesting. Definitely not for everybody. You got to be into international movies. You got to be into like the international movies from the 80s that are very rough around the edges and very somewhat obscure. Definitely about stuff politically you may not be as keyed into, like as I am not. So if you're into the kind of really going on the edges like that, for me it's 4 stars. For the average person, it might be like, whoa, that's a lot to go through. It's not for me. But if it sounds interesting to you, you might give that a go. Like I could see, I'm seeing other people that we know that might be really interested. Maybe Matt Stillman might be really interested in this. Joe Bridges would definitely give it a try. I don't know if he'd love it, but he'll try it. The most obscure things I've ever heard of, Joe Bridges has seen. So my guess is maybe he's already seen this somehow. He saw it like 10 years ago. Anyway, this is Leila and the Wolves. And next, I'll move my notes around here. Next up, I have Endless Calls for Fame. Endless Calls for Fame is directed by Olivia Serafini Sauli. Endless Calls for Fame is about a band called the New Rising Suns that I have never heard of, and maybe you have, and maybe you haven't. The New Rising Suns. So the key to this one is the New Rising Suns, as you kind of hear with voiceover in the beginning, which is by the filmmaker, and she doesn't voiceover throughout this, which is probably good because we don't really need to hear about how much she knew the band and how that she got all this footage and so on and so forth. She kind of does that at the beginning and she kind of comes back in at the end. But that is just explaining essentially where a lot of this, video footage came from of the band practicing and stuff. So I guess she was eventually essentially a friend or girlfriend or whatever of a band member or the band in general, and that's why you get a bunch of footage of them, recording and stuff. Anyway, New Rising Suns were kind of on that wave, post Nirvana wave in the 90s of kind of indie bands, especially kind of indie rock bands that A&R people were out trying to find. So, and this is like old news for most of you guys, but for anyone who doesn't know, kind of the way it worked is, before Nirvana, of course, it was just, big giant bands doing everything. And then little indie bands kind of had their own place, but they didn't really break out that much. But right around the time of Nirvana, some of these indie bands were starting to break out. You had Faith No More breaking out. You had Alice in Chains, which weren't really quite hair metal, and they kind of broke out. You got REM breaking out, which had been an indie band throughout the 80s. And then, of course, the huge explosion was when Nirvana broke out. And when Nirvana broke out, every A&R guy and every recording studio, every label was like, we got to find, there's got to be a bunch of other Nirvanas out there. We got to find them and get them and put them out. And that's when you have things like kind of established punk bands that were not big, all of a sudden getting a national, signing stage. They get, like, what do you get? Like Bad Religion comes back out. And who else? I'm trying to think. There's a few other ones. Social Distortion comes out with stuff that people get to hear. And a bunch of bands like that, I can to some degree, Red Hot Chili Peppers would have been one of those because they were around for a while and they all of a sudden blew up. So they're looking for all these bands that have been around to kind of, repackage and get money because the wave is cresting. And then you get a bunch of bands that were kind of around that era but never had been popular, and they try to get these bands and promote them that are brand new and be like, this is also going to be like a Nirvana or something. And these New Rising Suns, they make a great effort to show the three main guys in there. The bass player apparently was like Spinal Tap. The bass player in the band never was anything. Like they could never keep a bass player. So they don't even talk about the bass players they had at any point. and the album they record, in fact, has the recording studio guy doing the bass work, just playing all the bass parts. Anyway, these three dudes had been in various bands. None of them had ever been big, really, that in any bands. Some had been in bands that almost got signed, that kind of a thing. But then these three guys kind of got pushed together or kind of formed together to create the New Rising Suns. And there was kind of a buzz around them in New York, and everyone thought these guys are going to be the next big thing. And that is the main point of this movie. Is like, it's the idea of, we could have been big. We were right there at the right time. We had the studio buzz, and it just kind of all fell apart. And what happened? Let's find out what happened. Why didn't they make it? And then at the end, of course, there's going to be a little like, are they going to get back together? Or are they going to find fame again? A big part of it is they had a really storied, was it Bear in the Cave? I forget what it's called, studio. A really storied studio, a really nice studio, and a really good backing to record their first album. And supposedly it's this great album that never got released because it kind of all fell apart right at the last moment. So you can probably get from my tone that I wasn't in love with this movie. I didn't hate this movie, but the problem I had with it is there was a lack of, I don't know, as somebody who's really into the indie and punk scene, especially back then, and I love some big major artist stuff, but when I see indie bands that kind of blow up big, I feel like the ones that really make it generally are bands that, I'm not saying they have to like pay their dues, but sometimes they blow up really quickly, but I have to feel like that they're a genuine band that got into it for the love of what they were doing and were really passionate, and for whatever reason, right place, right time, or just greatness, which I would say like Nirvana is just greatness. But for whatever reason, the bands that make it that are like from the really small places like that, there's something genuine and a spark there, and they went out to the little clubs and people saw what was happening, and it just caught fire, especially back in the days when there weren't as many bands and as many ways to get the music. And it feels like, and it kind of was couched in this movie and hidden a little bit, it didn't feel like they were ever really a band. Like they were in bands that were really bands. They were in the New York scene, which once again, they really push up the New York scene, the New York punk scene as being this big influence, and CBGBs and stuff. Well, it was in the 70s when you had Talking Heads and bands like that. But the punk scene that I was in that really blew up in the 80s, which was mostly LA and DC and eventually that kind of expanded and became Seattle in the grunge era. That's a definite offshoot, straight offshoot of that punk scene. The punk scene in New York was never that great. There were a few bands that came out of New York, but considering how big of a city New York is, it was minuscule compared to the LA and the Southern California punk scene. So that alone made it kind of weird, but whatever. But these guys, it seemed like they, from the gate, out of the gate, were not really a band. It was almost like they were pushed to be a band. Like these are all guys that were in the scene that everyone knew from other bands. And they kind of got together and they thought, hey, we kind of have a spark. We're writing some cool stuff here. And they kind of, it sounded like their first show even was like a showcase for like record execs. Like that was their first show. So from the gate, when I watched this, I felt like this is a band that was really out to try to be famous first and music second, which is flipping it on its head and a recipe for, in most cases, disaster. Not always. Sometimes you get those prefab bands that end up being huge. It happens. I mean, the Sex Pistols to some degree was one of those bands. But I kind of got the feeling that that's what this band was, and they kind of didn't want to like promote it that way. So in that aspect, I was kind of annoyed by them right out of the gate. It never felt like they played that many shows. It never felt like they really toured. It never felt like they really just like grounded out, in any way. And they really wanted to be on the wave of Oasis and Blur and all that, like the second wave, right? The wave of all those British bands. And that was also annoying because those are some of the, I wouldn't say those are some of the worst bands. I mean, Radiohead and Blur are pretty great. Oasis, I hate. But these guys, like, they had the hair. They were trying to get that kind of Beatley, Brit Beatley, fake second wave kind of look. And it just seemed like these guys, to me, were in it for the wrong reasons. They were doing it for the wrong reasons. And that was the reason why they failed. Because they didn't start with the music first and it happened to be on the wave. They wanted to be on the wave. They wanted to ride the wave really hard. And then they happened to be pretty good musicians. So it's like the reverse. That's my impression. Anyway, long story short, or short story long, there isn't a lot here. Like you kind of come away from it going like, well, I can see why they weren't a big band because they were okay. But their record, when you finally hear it, is like, it's nothing special to me. But everyone thought it was special. And these guys don't seem that special. They're kind of a little bit, all of them a little bit high on their own supply. They think they're a little bit cooler than they are. And if they were a little bit cooler and not thinking they were cooler, I think that would have made it a more interesting movie and probably made them a better band. So I think they're a pretty mediocre band. I think they probably got about as much fame as they deserved. And this movie is probably more than they deserved. So I'm going to go 2.5 stars. It's not terrible. I think I want to give it as mid a review as the band is good. Mid. They are absolutely mid. So 2.5 stars is what I'm going to get for Endless Calls for Fame. And that name, I can't even remember it. I from the beginning of this review to the end of the review, I've already forgotten the name of this review. Endless Calls for Fame. So once again, what? I don't know, man. Okay. Last thing I got for you is a recommendation. So I had a customer come in and we talk movies. He's an older dude, older than me. I know, it's amazing, right? He's got to be in his 70s, I'm guessing. Yeah, he's probably in his 70s. And we talk movies because I'm one of the only people he knows when he comes in that, first of all, talks to him. And second of all, we can actually bond over movies. Although I told him, like, hey, my blind spot is, before this 1960s, I start to get pretty hazy. Don't have a ton of movies under my belt, but I can still talk with him. We can bring up Powell and, Black Narcissus and, whatever it might be. We can talk about some older movies. And he's happy to do that. And he, give me suggestions. And a lot of times I've seen him and I'll suggest stuff to him. And he's like, oh, wow, yeah, I've heard of that. I'm surprised anyone knows about that movie. Or I'll tell him a movie he maybe hasn't heard of. Well, I forget what we were talking about. Somehow it came up the other day. And he had mentioned this movie called Bigger Than Life, directed by Nicholas Ray, which I had not heard of. And he said, James Mason is in it. I was like, okay, well, that's cool. I might go and check that out. It's usually the movies from the 50s, this is 1956. Usually movies from the 50s, you can find fairly easily archive.org, or they're on various streaming services, or sometimes they're even on YouTube. Once you get in the 50s or earlier, a lot of those movies are around and about. So anyway, Bigger Than Life, Nicholas Ray did Rebel Without a Cause, and oh my gosh, what's the other really famous movie? I will not be able to remember it, but he's done several famous movies. This one was, I guess, at the time, kind of a bomb, and now I think it's got a Criterion release at some point. This one has, and I know this one has become a much more of a cult favorite in hindsight. So it stars James Mason as Ed, and Barbara Rush as Lou, and then Walter Matthau as Wally, his best friend. And this is a very odd movie. And if you like these kind of 50s era melodramas, suburban melodramas, which you get a few of those in that time period, this is like one of those movies that would have inspired a John Waters. And I think, I have a suspicion it might have slightly inspired a Stanley Kubrick too. Now, once again, high melodrama. Do not go into this thinking you're going to get subtle, fine art. But if you can go into some 50s high melodrama that is much darker than these kind of movies tended to be in the 50s, you might have a lot of fun with Bigger Than Life. The basic idea of Bigger Than Life is you've got Ed, James Mason, once again, and he is a school teacher. And of course, he's James Mason, as James Mason as you can get, British, blah, blah, blah. He's very proper and whatever. But right out of the gate, you get an idea there's something a little bit amiss with him, right? He's got the perfect family. He's got the kid. It's like almost like a sitcom, right? The perfect 50s wife, the perfect kid that, he could throw the baseball for in the backyard. In fact, there's a sequence of him throwing a football in the backyard. It's amazing in this movie. Anyway, everything's great, right? Except he's just having a hard time making ends meet. He needs a little bit more money. So he is working at a taxi dispatch office secretly, to the point his wife thinks she's cheating on him, or he's cheating on her. She thinks he's cheating on her, and it comes out pretty quickly that, oh yeah, I've been working this. And she's like, oh my gosh, you should have just told me. But why that comes up is one day he collapses, and they discover he has this rare vascular condition, and it could be fatal within a year. And they're, oh my gosh, and the strings, you can imagine the melodrama, the heightened strings, the music and everything. Oh my gosh, we're going to lose our dad and husband, and this is the end of the perfect family unit in the 50s. But they have an experimental drug of cortisone, which of course I think most of us have heard of cortisone, but at the time it was actually like used for this medication for this vascular disease. And it's like the wonder drug. This is like this amazing new drug that's going to help him and let him live his life, but he'll have to take it forever. Anyway, okay, you're kind of thinking to yourself, or I was at least, where's this movie going? He has this life-threatening disease or life-threatening condition. He gets this wonder drug. He goes home with the drug, and now what? But they'd make a point when he goes home, only take it. And I forget what the dosage is, but it's like every 6 hours, I think it was. Take one every 6 hours, no more, no less. And you're like, oh, okay, I see what this is. If you take the wrong amount, something might happen. So basically, the bulk of this movie is an addiction movie and a drug abuse movie, and a man like spiraling into cortisone psychosis. And it is quite something to see. And I can't really get into all the ways that it goes wrong, but it goes pretty spectacularly wrong. And as James Mason's performance becomes more and more hyperventilating and sweaty, it just becomes more and more fun. And there is some really weird stuff in here about like masculinity and about, violence, and about almost like I don't know, like cult leadering. It's very, very subtle there, but there's a point where he goes off the rails, and half of the group that he's talking to is like appalled and shocked by what he's saying, and the other half is like, I kind of go with what he's saying, which is kind of almost a political statement. And there's some scenes towards the end that are shot. I mean, it's like a shot like a horror movie in the last third. There are some shots that are amazingly dramatic and noiry. This is all color though. And there's some sequence where at the very end, and once again, I'm not going to spoil exactly what goes down. It's an easy one for you guys to consume. I think it's like 90 minutes, like most of the movies that time period. There's a sequence towards the end of the movie where he's got a pair of scissors And I swear the way it's shot and the way it's blocked out is got to have been inspirational to Stanley Kubrick in The Shining, Axe, Kid and, Danny and what was her name in that? I don't remember her name now. Danny and wife hiding in the bathroom when he has the axe. I feel like there's some definite visual echoes there. And the fact that Kubrick worked with James Mason after James Mason made this movie, I do believe, if I had the timing right, because I believe that Lolita was around 1960. So he worked with James Mason after this movie was made. He made The Shining well after this was made. I think that Kubrick, and maybe I didn't look, maybe there's quotes out there. I think Kubrick must have seen this movie and had a little bit of admiration, at least for some of the final sequences in this movie. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with this movie. It's no like great masterpiece, but as a sweaty, overwrought pot boiler of a family melodrama with very dark overtones for the 50s, you could do a whole lot worse. That's a 4-star movie for me in Bigger Than Life by Nicholas Ray. And that is it. That's all I got this week. Not the best week for movies, kind of an odd week, kind of like a lot of stuff that was kind of out of the ordinary and on the edges. But next week, I think we have some interesting choices for sure. So we'll see what we bring you next week. But I know there's 3 or 4 movies out there already, and I'm kind of curious to see how those kind of play out. Hope you all have a great rest of your week, and let us know what you want us to watch for the 2001 Patreon episode. Now, I know that Greg might have already got the choices, but if he hasn't and you're hearing this and you still haven't put a choice out there, let us know what movie we should watch from 2001. All right. Thanks, guys. Talk to you later.